In May of 2021, the world was shocked to learn of the discovery of hundreds of unmarked gravesites along Canada's Indian residential schools. Among the families of residential school survivors, this was already common knowledge. Many stories go untold. There are untold heroes. This is the story of Alfred Kirkness. Alf was born in the Island Lake area of Manitoba in 1902. He entered Brandon Residential School when he was 6 years old, which was later converted to the Brandon Residential School. Alf lived at the Brandon School, leaving briefly to work in Saskatchewan. After returning to Brandon, he worked for the next 38 years in maintenance for the Canadian Department of Agriculture's experimental farm adjacent to the residential school. Over time, the school cemeteries and location were lost due to neglect, overland flooding, and land title changes. His first-hand account of the area's history laid a path for his mission to bring recognition and respect to students buried at those sites and healing to the families.
My name is Anne Lindsay. I'm an archivist and an historian, so I'm trained how to create and operate in archives, and I'm also trained in how to do historical research. And how I became interested in Alfred Kirkness's story was that I was asked to do some research. This was before the TRC even had started, about the cemetery or cemeteries at the Brandon Residential School. We knew that there was one cemetery there, but people were not sure. There were stories that there had been two. And so I started out on that journey just to identify whether there were one or two cemeteries, and if there were two, where this other cemetery would be.
Anne and I were actually students together in the same archival studies class. And this was just one of many projects she's worked on here at the Winnipeg office. A project concerned with properly memorializing the students that died at the Brandon Residential School. We had sort of looked at various files more explicitly associated with the school. Often student deaths will be noted in admissions and discharge files, etc., or in quarterly returns of students that were no longer at the school. She had been working with that kind of material for a few days, and then I sort of expanded the search a bit to look at some land files associated with, well, one was explicitly associated with the school, and a couple others that we were able to find later through association. So I was looking through one afternoon this new file on miscellaneous land matters that I had identified, and came across, I think, the first of the Kirkness letters that I'd seen. I could hardly wait till she was able to return just to share my own excitement with her.
So I came in the next day and we opened it up. But even, until we opened that file, we didn't know that it would be this amazing correspondence. We were just hoping it would be something to do with the cemetery.
It's remarkable how he was very strategic in his approach with different letters, and he would try different rhetorical strategies. In some cases, he would, even employ biblical imagery.
Dear Sir, I have seen your field representative and Mr. F. Bond. The impression I got was they did not care. The cemetery are out of sight and one will ever see them. But they did mention adding 2 more wings to the buildings you already have. We build empires of great buildings of stone, steel, and brick. We add wings to buildings we already have. Thousands is spent for people to see what great things the department can boast about. The glory of these things will pass away, but the one thing that men will remember is a cup of cold water given in love. The little things we do for others are the big things we do for ourselves. I'm sure a cup of cold water will be a small price to pay to have these students' remains moved compared to the price the department is willing to spend on building 2 new wings. I am sending in a picture report on the condition of the cemetery north of the school. You will see what I mean when I say, is your school going to be large enough to hide the condition of this cemetery? The cow dung around the cemetery makes great bouquets for the department. Sincerely yours, Alfred J. Kirkness.
The thing that struck us was the sort of persistence and the dedication to the memory of those students.
Another friend and colleague, Claire Cook, joined us, and David and Claire and I worked together to go a little bit into the background of who Alfred Kirkness was and what his own story was, what his reasons for wanting to deal with the cemeteries and his perseverance in doing that. And what we found was just every day a little bit more remarkable. I really just looked forward to the next page. We would not know where that other cemetery was. This is the cemetery that's close to the river. It's the older of the 2 cemeteries, and it was probably abandoned sort of in the 19-teens. So by the time Alfred Kirkness was advocating for both cemeteries, it was invisible. It had just been rendered invisible.
As far as we can tell, he was in contact with the department even before the first letter that is included in a file that we have here in the Winnipeg office. Because the article that we wrote discusses a story in the Brandon paper in which he takes several department officials out to show them where the older cemetery was located. And that newspaper story even frames it as if the conclusion of a long struggle already. That story is in 1963, and the first letter we have is dated from 1964. Just sort of, again, underlines how perseverant he was and how consistent he was in acting as the department's conscience and saying, you should be taking responsibility for this. Somebody should be taking responsibility for this. These cemeteries should not be so poorly maintained and the memory of the students so disregarded. As we know from other records, that he worked for 38 years at the experimental farm immediately next to the residential school that he himself attended. Like since before school age, because his admission form actually, which says he was 6 at the time, notes that he had lived at the school for 3.5 years before that he had attended the school himself and no doubt knew the students that were buried in that cemetery. Without ever mentioning that in the letters, it speaks to that sense of humility and the fact that it's the actions that matter. Not who he is, but what needs to be done.
Denying children of their identities is a symptom of colonial violence that sustains intergenerational trauma, and so part of that work is to bring healing in that manner and bring justice to light in something that's a really historical wrongdoing. The children from Sioux Valley were sent all over Manitoba. The reason for that is they wanted to break down community. They wanted to break down families. Well, you do that by separating them. They grow up not knowing who their fellow community members are because they're so isolated from each other.
We would like to start that engagement process and working with the relatives and families on how to move this project forward in a respectful way.
Our informal working group consists of members from Sioux Valley, the researchers from Simon Fraser University and Brandon University, and the staff from Agri-Food and Agriculture Canada. The heart of the project is to honor the children who were brought to the school, pay our respects to the families, the survivors in the communities that are impacted by this school. Within my own family, I have members that went to Brandon, Dauphin, just all over Manitoba.
The Brandon Residential School, we've identified 2 cemeteries. There's one that's close to the Assiniboine River, south of the school, and that was the original school cemetery. And there's a second school cemetery, it's north of the school. And we've also identified 2 locations on the school property, just behind the school. And those are areas that survivors identified that there are unmarked graves. We were able to find some archival records to support that. And the forensic fieldwork also confirmed that there were depressions there. So in total, we actually have 4 areas. Through our efforts to locate all of the cemeteries and the unmarked graves, our total right now is 104 potential unmarked graves. And we've also been actively working to find all of the children's names who passed away at the school. And right now we have a list of 98 children. And that list is ever growing as survivors and family members come forward to report loved ones that also have gone missing and that are not on this list.
I'm a mother, so I've had these kind of difficult conversations. He's really young, but just trying to explain it to him that, he's growing up. I'm teaching him as much Dakota language and about our culture as much as possible, and just trying to explain that the reason we don't speak just Dakota is because of that systemic attempt to erase our culture and our identities.
They don't deserve to be forgotten. How can we keep them alive? How can we pass their stories on? Which is, how human beings have always operated in sort of making sure that there's some continuity with our past that allows us to face the future. And without that connection to the past, I suppose that relates to why people are motivated to find more about students in the cemeteries. You want to remember them. That's the way human beings keep people they love alive, is by remembering them and talking about them. And to think that people could just disappear is upsetting and distressing for those that did care about them and love them.
I'm really grateful. I'm really proud of the work that Sioux Valley is doing and the work that Catherine has been doing. This past gathering, we had the list of names read aloud in a moment of silence, and that was really impactful. I can't even describe the feelings that I felt at that moment, but I'm very grateful for the work that's being done, and I'm happy I could be a part of it in some way.
So it's only because of the letters and the map, and Alfred Kirkness actually took some people out and showed them on the land where the cemetery was, that we know where that cemetery is today. If you look at the number of years and the number of times that he wrote a letter explaining the same problem again, and kept his cool through all of that. But I think he was also passionate. I think that he couldn't have stuck with this for the number of years that he did if he didn't care deeply about the problems that he was seeing in terms of basically erasing the lives of these children.